For more than a century, the wreck of the Titanic has rested 2.5 miles beneath the North Atlantic, in a place almost no human being will ever see. A company called OceanGate promised to change that. Founded by an American entrepreneur named Stockton Rush, OceanGate believed the deep ocean should be opened up, not just to scientists and navies, but to paying explorers. For around $250,000 a seat, it offered wealthy adventurers a chance to descend to the Titanic itself in a submersible unlike any other. It was a bold, futuristic vision. Rush spoke of pushing boundaries, of not being held back by old rules. But the very thing that made his vision so daring, the refusal to do things the established way, would sit at the heart of the tragedy to come. This is the story of the Submersible Titan. How it was built, why so many tried to warn against it, and the 5 people who never came back. The vessel was called Titan. At first glance, it looked like something from science fiction, a smooth white capsule about the size of a small van, built to carry 5 people nearly 4,000 meters down. But Titan was different from every other deep-diving submersible in one crucial way. Most deep submersibles use a sphere of titanium or steel, the strongest shape against pressure. Titan's main hull was a cylinder, made largely of carbon fibre, a material prized in aerospace for being light and strong, but rarely trusted for repeated deep ocean dives. Its ends were capped with titanium domes, and passengers looked out through a single circular viewport. Inside, there were no seats and no controls in the traditional sense. The pilot steered the multi-million-dollar craft with a modified video game controller. And critically, Titan was never reviewed or certified by any independent marine authority. OceanGate argued that outside certification would stifle innovation. It was, by design, experimental. Titan did not fail without warning. Years before the tragedy, people who understood the deep ocean tried to sound the alarm. In 2018, OceanGate's own director of marine operations, David Lockridge, raised serious concerns about the hull and the company's testing. He was dismissed, and a legal battle followed. That same year, dozens of leading experts from the submersible industry signed a letter to OceanGate, warning that its experimental approach could lead to catastrophic consequences. Others in the deep-sea community pleaded privately with the company to have the vessel certified. The central fear was always the carbon fibre. Unlike metal, carbon fibre can weaken invisibly over time, its layers slowly separating under the crushing stress of dive after dive. To monitor this, OceanGate fitted the hull with acoustic sensors, meant to listen for the sound of the material cracking. But a system that warns you the hull is failing is not the same as a hull that will not fail. The warnings were noted. The dives continued. To understand the danger, you have to understand where Titan was going. The Titanic lies about 370 nautical miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, and roughly 3,800 meters straight down. It is a world of total darkness and near freezing water. And it is a world of unimaginable pressure. At that depth, every square inch of the submersible is squeezed by around 5,600 pounds of force, hundreds of times the pressure at the surface. A vessel down there is like an egg held in a giant closing fist. The tiniest flaw, the smallest weakness in the hull, can be fatal in an instant. For a properly built and certified submersible, this environment is survivable. Explorers had safely visited the Titanic many times before. But every trip to that depth is a gamble against the ocean, and it demands a vessel you can trust completely. On the 18th of June 2023, 5 people boarded the Titan. There was Stockton Rush, the 61-year-old founder of OceanGate, who would pilot the craft. There was Paul-Henri, a 77-year-old French explorer so devoted to the wreck that many simply called him Mr. Titanic. He had visited the ship more than 30 times. There was Hamish Harding, a 58-year-old British businessman and adventurer who had travelled to space and to the ocean's deepest point. And there were Shahzada Dawood, a 48-year-old British-Pakistani businessman, and his son, Suleiman, just 19 years old, a student who, his family later said, had been nervous about the trip. They came from different worlds, drawn together by the same pull, the desire to see, with their own eyes, the most famous shipwreck in history. That morning, Titan was lowered into the water from its support ship, the Polar Prince, and began its slow descent into the dark. For the first hour and a half, everything seemed routine. The submersible sent occasional text messages up to the surface as it sank, deeper and deeper toward the wreck. Then, about 1 hour and 45 minutes into the dive, the messages stopped. Titan fell silent. On the surface, the crew of the Polar Prince waited for the submersible to check in. It did not. The hours ticked by with no word, no signal, nothing. Titan was due to resurface that afternoon. When it failed to appear and every attempt to reach it went unanswered, a quiet dread settled over the ship. Something had gone terribly wrong, somewhere in the blackness below. And so began one of the largest and most desperate search operations the ocean has ever seen. The world watched, transfixed. The United States and Canadian Coast Guards, the Navy, aircraft and deep-sea robots converged on a remote patch of the North Atlantic. Experts estimated that if Titan were intact and its occupants alive, they had only about 96 hours of breathable air. And so a countdown began, broadcast on every news channel on Earth, a race against a dwindling oxygen supply. Search planes flew grids across the empty sea. Ships listened with underwater microphones. At one point, aircraft detected mysterious banging noises beneath the waves, and for a few agonizing hours the world dared to hope that the 5 were alive and signaling for rescue. But the sounds could never be linked to the Titan. As the estimated air supply ran lower and lower, the search grew more frantic and more hopeless. Rescuers were combing an area twice the size of a small country, in water miles deep, for a vessel the size of a truck. On the 22nd of June, 4 days after Titan vanished, a remotely operated robot descended to the seafloor near the Titanic. There, on the bottom of the ocean, it found what searchers had feared. A field of debris scattered across the seabed only about 500 meters from the bow of the Titanic itself. Among the wreckage were the unmistakable remains of the Titan, torn apart and strewn across the ocean floor. The Coast Guard soon confirmed the terrible truth. The debris was consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the submersible's pressure chamber. All 5 people aboard had been lost. The countdown, the banging noises, the 96 hours of hope, all of it, investigators would later conclude, had been for a vessel that was very likely already gone. To understand what happened to the Titan, you have to return to that crushing pressure. Investigators believe that at some point during its descent on the 18th of June, the hull of the Titan finally failed. When a pressure vessel gives way at that depth, it does not leak or slowly flood. It implodes. In a fraction of a second, the immense weight of the ocean collapses the chamber inward with staggering violence, faster than the human mind can even register. For the 5 people aboard, the end would have come almost instantly, before they could have known anything was wrong. It is, in the darkest way, a small mercy in an overwhelming tragedy. The very pressure that Titan was built to defy had, in the end, defeated it in the time it takes to blink. In the months that followed, wreckage from the Titan and presumed human remains were raised from the sea floor and examined, and the world began to ask how this could have been allowed to happen. The United States Coast Guard convened its highest level of inquiry. In public hearings, former employees and experts described a company that had, again and again, chosen ambition over caution. Investigators examined the carbon-fibre hull and found signs of damage and fatigue in the material, exactly the kind of failure that critics had warned about for years. Witnesses revealed that on an earlier dive, the crew had heard a loud bang, a sound that may have been the hull beginning to break down. The picture that emerged was not of a freak accident, but of a disaster that many had seen coming and had tried in vain to prevent. The story of the Titan is, in the end, a very old story, wearing new technology. Like the great ship it went to visit, it is a story of confidence outrunning caution, of the belief that human ingenuity had conquered a danger that, in truth, it had only forgotten to respect. 5 people paid for that belief with their lives: Stockton Rush, Paul-Henri Narjolet, Hamish Harding, Shahzada Dawood, and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. They were dreamers and adventurers drawn to the edge of the known world. Their loss forced a hard reckoning about safety, about regulation, and about the price of pushing too far, too fast. The deep ocean remains one of the last true frontiers, beautiful and utterly unforgiving. And it still holds the same quiet lesson it has always held, that the sea does not care how clever we are. It asks only that we respect it